So it's preparing it. Just a second here. And now I'm going to hit the record button in Zoom.
Yippee.
All right, Commission President Rachel Lyle Smith, we are ready to begin with the work session whenever you are.
Thank you, Ms. Riggs. So it is just after 6 p.m. on December 16th, 2020. I'm going to call the City Commission work session to order. Katie, can you call the roll, please?
Yeah, I have Commissioner Denise McGriff.
Here.
Can you guys hear that?
Yes.
Okay, I thought I was just hearing it. So hold on just a second.
I think Katie's hearing stuff. I can.
Uh-oh.
We got Ms. Commissioner McGriff, Commissioner Smith,
Here.
Commissioner O'Donnell,
Here.
and I'm Commissioner President Rachel Lyle Smith. All right, our first item of business is proposed code amendments to the Oregon City Municipal Code, Chapter 12.04. Mr. Wheeler, I believe you're up.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. All right, we're seeing the full screen, is that correct?
Yep.
All right. Okay, so hello again, commissioners, and good evening. As you know, my name is Josh Wheeler, and I'm the Assistant City Engineer for the City of Oregon City Public Works. And John Lewis is trying to get on this call. He just talked to me, and he's running a little late, but if you have any questions, I can take those. But tonight, we're going to make a presentation on the proposed code amendments for sidewalk obstructions, well, really right-of-way obstructions. We previously provided a more general overview of all proposed code amendments back on November 18th. And we did a detailed review of the sewer code 1308 of those amendments on last Tuesday, December 8th. You've seen this picture last week. And so the green are ones that we've kind of taken care of and are planning to move forward with an ordinance on. The yellow are ones that we're going to package as a second ordinance once we have a discussion tonight and a discussion in January. And if there's further discussion needed after that, then we will do that. And then the cyan blue color is in February for geologic hazards, which will be a third ordinance that we'll be seeking. But tonight, the star you see on the left, we're going to be talking about 1204 right-of-way obstructions and more specifically long-term temporary obstructions. So back on the November 18th, 2020 City Commission meeting, we were given direction to detail certain portions of proposed code in future work sessions. And so today we're going to talk about the temporary obstructions. This began through a request by the City Commission back in December of 2019 after concerns, excuse me, about permitting fees, which were raised by the Oregon City Downtown Association when it dealt with sidewalk seating. Staff brought an overview of the proposed code revisions back in June of 2020 to make sure that it was something we wanted to proceed with. And then July of 2020, there was a side program, which was the Parklet program, which was adopted by resolution in July, and that was a pilot program for the next year or two, depending on how long this pandemic went. Back in 2019, Public Works implemented a program to permit sidewalk seating in the public right-of-way with a permit fee called a renewable right-of-way permit. That fee was placed on February 20th resolution to adopt engineering fees. The only people that are really impacted by this code revision would be businesses who use the public sidewalk, which mostly occurs on Main Street and 7th Street. And we're proposing two categories of temporary obstructions, short-term and long-term. Existing code really only talks about temporary obstructions, and it talks about 0 to 60 days. And so when we talked to you in December of 2019, we mentioned that we were using the code for temporary obstructions, but kind of using it in a unstated policy way for the sidewalk seating, which had been used and done in Oregon City for years, but never really enforced in any way or permitted. Really, the main purpose of this obstruction code in 1204 is safety. We need to maintain ADA accessibility within our right-of-way. And as you can see in the picture that I've added, some sidewalks can get quite narrow with light poles, benches, displays, items for sale, cluttering the available sidewalk space, which makes it difficult not only for a regular pedestrian, but also, as in the picture, someone with a wheelchair. Our permitting process requires space to be available for accessible users following the state and federal ADA guidelines. Something you saw in your package back in November was a proposed policy for these sidewalk obstructions, which we do plan to come back with, but we're attempting to get the code approved first and then bring the policy back after. The policy has a picture that was discussed at the November meeting that has some a number of dimensions showing a wheelchair and all these different dimensions that comes straight out of the ADA guidelines. And whether good or bad, clear or unclear, it is the standard that we have to follow that comes from a federal guideline. Another purpose of the obstruction code is also to ensure sight lines are available for safe driving, biking, and walking. This could mean that a desired obstruction does not create a vision block based on our sightline code, which already exists in Chapter 10 of the code. So short-term obstructions. Existing code already allows temporary obstructions in a short-term way. We commonly permit moving pods and construction dumpsters. That's a fairly common permit to get. These are examples of what that looks like. While not in our specific city, this is very similar to what you would see throughout our city when someone's moving or doing some construction. When they can, and we attempt to ask them to put that on private property, in their driveway, in their yard, places like that. Sometimes that there's just no room for that, and so right-of-way is the only place they have to do that. But we always ask them for alternatives before we use the right-of-way for this. These obstructions, they're not attached to the ground, even though clearly very difficult to move, but they're allowed up to a maximum of 60 days. There are situations where the need is longer than 60 days, and in those rare cases, we require an extension of the permit, which requires a second fee, basically a second permit for an additional 60 days. We don't allow them to go on and on and on. Really, only one renewal is pretty much all we provide, and it's really all that's usually needed. And this usually happens with construction debris. That's usually where the project took a little longer than 60 days and they needed a little more time. So one thing we're proposing in code that's not in code right now is to define what long-term temporary obstructions are. Typically that would be things like sidewalk sitting and parklets, which is what we've permitted in 2019 and 2020. Long-term temporary obstructions would exist up to a year and will be renewed on an annual basis. Current proposed code, based on initial feedback from the City Commission in December of last year, states that long-term temporary obstructions are only allowed March 15th to November 30th. So the red lines that you have proposes that the parklets, sidewalks, and anything else you want in the right-of-way on a long-term temporary basis is only allowed March 15th to November 30th. We have learned with COVID, however, that it may be important to allow sidewalk and seating in the winter months to allow the businesses to thrive. However, we asked the commission if they would like to keep this restriction or allow it for the entire year and then renew it once a year. We're also asking each business to renew the right-of-way permit every year, which is why we call the permit a renewable right-of-way permit. It's annually, just like a business license. That would allow us to track who is using the right-of-way, provide reminders of spacing, requirements, etc. And this permit, like an obstruction permit, is revocable and requires proof of insurance and signing of an indemnity agreement. Just a little bit on fees. Fees are not part of the code. Fees would be a separate resolution that we would bring back at a different time. But it does relate, so I wanted to talk about it. Two fees do exist within the engineering fee resolution that we have today. Temporary obstruction permits are $56, and renewable right-of-way permits are $167. You may remember that this was a question of by DOCA, the Downtown Association, about that this fee may be too high. In 2020, we waived that fee with the parklet resolution during this COVID time, but that's something that we will need to revisit in the future. We do anticipate discussing those permit fees either with the proposed parklet discussion that I believe is currently slated for February, or later on in the spring. So we'll just have to decide when the best time to discuss those fees are. Fees are established by resolution, not by code. Lastly, a note about sidewalk sales. This was discussed in December of 2019, and it's something that ultimately we decided from feedback that we got from you back in June of 2020, that sidewalk sales is not something that we need to add anything in code for. And so really sidewalk sales are currently prohibited by code. Sidewalk sales can constrain an already narrow sidewalk in our downtown and 7th Street. We're not like Portland or maybe some other cities that have much wider sidewalks in their downtown areas. Where they have more room, we have less room. And so they really are something you probably don't want to provide on a regular basis, or we would not recommend that, at least because it provides a lot of obstruction. Right now, a business can do sidewalk sales if they use a special event permit. So they could get a special event permit, request, let's say, a Saturday and a Sunday for a sidewalk sale on whatever day that is. And we would charge them the fee with various regulations on spacing and standards and making sure there's room for ADA and all that. And then we would allow them to have the special event permit. If the commission designates an area of the city, this is stated in code right now, that's allowed for sidewalk sales, then we have proposed language in the code to require a renewable right-of-way permit to hold those sales. So instead of a special event permit, you could, with a resolution, say that we designate X street from block to block, wherever that is, and say that sidewalk sales are always allowed when a permit is received, and then that renewable right-of-way permit would be given for that. That renewable right-of-way permit would be a long-term temporary, which means they could do that on a regular basis through that annual period. So it would be a question of if that is something that you want in the future, or if you prefer people to go through the special event process or something different. And then lastly, where do we go from here? I assume after this short presentation, you'll have some questions, and the two biggies that I'm hoping to resolve is about the timing, the March to November timeline, and then about sidewalk sales, if you want to keep it as is, pretty much under a special event permit. And if so, we will be bringing this as an ordinance, likely in February, to join in with the other ones that were in that shaded yellow, which I'm going to show you here in a second. Because we're going to have a discussion on January 12th on chapter 1612 and 1704 dealing with land use related to capital improvement projects, which ties into this to some degree. And so we want to bring that together as a package ultimately when we do the ordinance. This is where we're at right now that I started the presentation with. So we just completed a presentation on the obstructions, and now I would assume you may have some questions for me. So I'm all ears. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thank you, Josh. I'm looking for raised hands in the Zoom. If anybody has any questions. Commissioner McGriff.
Yes. Hi, Josh. My couple of questions. Number one, about the like the dumpsters or the pods. Aren't they required to have the permit posted on them?
That is a good question. I do not know that answer. There is language in our permit that has a number of different stipulations on it. Unfortunately, I do not know every condition on that permit.
Okay, well, the reason I'm asking is that there's one on Lawton Road that's a tractor trailer that must have a refrigerated system in it that has, it's got a notice on it, it's posted. And as I've driven around town on errands, I've looked to see if other of the, not tractor trailers, but like pods, they should have, well, anyway, my question is, if they don't, you should have the permit on there, because what I have found is that people will just drop these things and they don't pay any attention to site obstructions or things of that sort. So I'm wondering why the code doesn't specify that they are required before they're allowed to put it on the street to show why they can't put it in their property. The first choice should be, it should be on their property. And if they live in an area where there's a problem, I think that we shouldn't just be allowing them to be placed willy-nilly.
Absolutely, and we agree with that. When people come in and request these permits, we work with them to see if there is another option, and then they show us why that option is not possible. And then at that point, then we go through the process of allowing the temporary obstruction. And then it does have to meet a number of different requirements too. The site obstruction code of Chapter 10 has to apply. Things like dumpsters or the tractor trailer that you mentioned, have to meet requirements of separation from an intersection. And so there's a number of different things that we apply, sometimes as special conditions on the permit. And then we have a list of regular conditions too. And so that's something that probably can be done administratively. And so if it's not already on the permit to be posted, I can make sure that is on our application. But I believe that would be probably handled administratively rather than in code.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I think that's fine. I think basically we should also take the opportunity to send it to the companies that do these, because I'm sure that half of them that get dropped in Oregon City or anywhere else, they don't call to find out whether they can put it on the street. But then my second question involves, you showed a picture of the chairs and tables at the Verdict. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with what they're doing, but I walked the entire downtown last Saturday to look at the light boxes. And I'm just wondering if when people request these, do they show where their tables and chairs are going to be?
So I'm going to have a complicated answer to that.
That's okay. It's either yes, they do, or no, they don't.
The simple answer is yes, but I can tell you what happens in actuality, because we dealt with.
They get moved?
They get moved by the patrons, and we dealt with that this summer a lot. I was doing regular inspections down there to try and get people to understand what they've been permitted for, and I spoke to some of the managers and the owners down there, and when I saw things were out of compliance, and they've kind of promised to me that they would talk with their waiters and waitresses and managers and keep an eye on that, but ultimately they didn't have a lot of control over patrons moving something here or there, which I understand.
Yeah, I figured that was the case.
Yeah, but they do give us a map, so we know what it's to look like.
The onus is really on them to put them back. I will tell you that, so on your comment that you made about, for a person walking through, well, to me, a person in a wheelchair is a person wandering through as well.
Absolutely.
I can tell you that if I had been in a wheelchair, I could barely get through as a person. And I wasn't carrying anything large. I just had a small tote bag with me to pick up cookie cutters and stuff like that, because people were doing that downtown. And the other thing that was concerning to me was trying to walk on the sidewalk with the COVID restrictions and trying to stay away from people, that was extremely difficult with the way the tables and chairs were. So some of the times I just walked off the curb and, walked that way. But there was some particular, it was really interesting trying to navigate my way from 10th and Main to 5th and Main and then back up the street.
Yeah, this summer I actually brought a tape measure with me and was making sure minimum 4 feet was in areas, and when they weren't, I was instructing the managers what the standard was and what they were permitted for. I suppose the good news from a city standpoint is that we absolutely get a map of what it's supposed to look like and all the standards of what they're supposed to follow. When they don't follow it, we have the indemnity agreement that makes the onus on the owner, not us. So that's what we've done to try and protect ourselves from that. But yes, everything you've said is completely valid, and we saw it all summer.
Well, it's going on now, so I'm just giving you a heads up. It was just like I said, it was just a little disconcerting because of not only because of the short distances, but COVID was, my primary issue was trying to navigate. There's a table here, and I couldn't be 6 feet away from them, and then somebody's coming towards me. It was interesting navigating.
Thank you for the feedback.
So I will respond to Commissioner McGriff. It is in the code. It says the permittee shall post a weatherproof copy of the temporary obstruction permit in plain view from the right of way. So it does require that the copy of the permit is posted. My question, first, I guess I have a couple. I'm trying to understand the difference between the short term and the long term. And is the main difference, obviously there's a time piece to it, but as far as what's allowed, I don't know that I see any difference between the short term and long term. So in that case, it's just whether or not you pay a lower fee versus a higher fee.
Yes, I would agree with that. And the intent of the implementation is that short-term are meant for things like pods and dumpsters, and long-term is meant for sidewalks and parklets. Is that explicitly stated? No. And do we need to do that? I'm not sure.
Well, I know you give examples, and that's fine. I'm just trying to make sure I understand, and that's fine. So my question is about in your presentation, in our conversation, you use the word parklets. When I look in the code, I don't see the word parklet. I see the word sidewalk seating. And to me, those are two different things. And so I'm trying to understand, and we just want to make sure I understand that parklets, I don't read this and see that parklets are allowed. And so I'm trying to get clarity that, we implemented it for COVID. And we had this conversation, and my concern was that once we go down this road, we're essentially saying we're going to have them. And I feel like we're there now, even though we said we wanted this to come back to us in March. I believe we're revisiting the parklet thing again. So I'm a little confused between not seeing parklet in any of the word parklet in our code, and maybe I missed it, versus us the word parklet in the conversation that we're having. So can you clarify?
Yes, just a second. So the definition of temporary obstruction as it exists today says an object placed in a street, road, or alley. We added the word sidewalk and then added that it's not permanently anchored to a surface. So my interpretation of that is that a parklet is an object placed in a street or road. And so today's code seems to allow that from a definition standpoint. But the commission has the ability to say that parklets should not be followed under basic city code. I mean, this is what helps us implement a parklet program, but that the resolution is what requires the implementation. So we can, sometimes objects placed in a street are, also like the dumpster, the pod, those are in a street. And so just like a parklet. So it's, unless we state specifically in the obstruction code that parklets are not found under this, and it would only be by resolution, that's something you may want to consider. But right now, the way the definition is, a parklet would be one of those options.
So you're saying that if someone wanted to do a parklet before COVID, they probably could have, and they just didn't explore it, and we didn't think it was possible.
Based on that definition, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I guess I'll give that one some thought as far as this moving that to a permanent. I wasn't sure that we were ready for that, to say that parklets were just allowed. And I think perhaps in our resolution, maybe we were defining it to be within the downtown area and being very specific. So you're saying that it's allowed in the code, but we're using our resolution to say specifically where they're allowed?
Yeah, so quite often the resolutions implement the code. And so the code is the basis of the structure of the guidelines, but then the implementation comes from a resolution, quite similarly to our engineering design standards, that we have code that says in chapter 13 that we have this thing called the water design standards, but then we have the design standards adopted by resolution that implement the code that allows them to exist. I think the same thing would happen here, is that the code allows obstructions in the right of way to exist with the proper permit, but your resolution on parklets is how we implement that. And then the resolution on fees implements the fee for it. So I would guess, without being a lawyer, that the way we're doing it right now is still appropriate, and that the direction that the commission has provided on parklets through the resolution, that's where the implementation is occurring. So while it may have been allowed before, there wasn't really a mechanism to implement it. Your resolution currently implements it. I believe that topic is coming back in February for the initial discussion on that.
Okay. And then I guess finally, my question is about the sidewalk sales. How much does it cost for a special event permit versus well, you showed us the cost for the renewable or temporary obstruction permit. Do you know how much it is for a special event permit?
I can get that information really quickly here. Off the top of my head, I think I know, but I don't want to state it incorrectly. So, our fees change on January 1st, and so I'm going to give you the one that is effective this coming January 1st. A few dollars more. Special event permits, there it is $340.
Ooh.
So whenever we have like the different events, the first city celebration, some of those types of things, or block parties, those all cost $340 each.
Right, and I understand. I think those are in alignment. I'm just struggling with the idea of a sidewalk sale needing a special event permit. And I guess it seems like the alternative is for us to designate an area where we think sidewalk sales are allowed, and therefore they're allowed to use a different type of permit. Do I have that correct?
You do have that correct, because current code does not allow any sidewalk sale whatsoever in the city of Oregon City. We do know that some people have used the sidewalk for that, but it's officially not allowed. And so the way that you allow it is to designate an area. And then I've written code in, I've proposed code to make the way we implement it through that renewable right-of-way permit.
Okay. I guess I have some concern. I have some concerns about the sidewalk sale conversation. I'll hand this off and hear comments from others, but I'm definitely, I don't think I'm in agreement with the special event permit idea. I mean, I guess it could be in there, and our way around is to designate areas that we think this is okay. But I'm just thinking of businesses that are on the hilltop that may want to have a sidewalk sale. We haven't designated every area in the city that has a business that wants to have a sidewalk sale. Then they've got to do a special event permit. And
Actually, no, that's a little different though.
okay.
The sidewalk sales are specifically relating to public right-of-way sidewalks, so using the public right-of-way for the sidewalk sale, which really that opportunity only truly exists really in 7th and Main and some of the side streets in downtown. When it to the hilltop, other shopping centers, those all have private sidewalks, and they can do absolutely whatever they want within planning guidelines to do that. So that's a different situation.
Gotcha. So I guess I'll end with this, and then I'll turn the pass the discussion on to others. I'm wondering if we're making the sidewalk sale process more difficult than it needs to be. I feel like it's like there's all these winding paths, and we could make it much more simple. I saw Commissioner Smith shaking his head, but I think Commissioner O'Donnell, you had your hand raised while I was going through my questions, so I'll go to you.
Well, I'll start with the sidewalk seating. You know, the question is who or which department monitors that sidewalk seating, which personnel, and if people are not complying with what they agreed to do, what enforcement actions, if any, occur?
So as with all code requirements, when code is violated, the only way staff finds out is by a complaint. And so when that complaint is provided, we, whichever department's responsible, which would be us in this case, because we're the ones that issued the permit. So us being Public Works. And we would look into it, see if it's out of compliance with the permit. If it is, we will show them what they need to do to fix that. If they don't fix it, then they get sent into code enforcement. But there's no one that looks at that on a regular basis, as with any code besides the parking that occurs through parking enforcement.
Yeah, and I've struggled with that. If it's complaint based, how would any average citizen know that they were in violation of what was supposed to occur? So the thing can go on indefinitely in the absence of a complaint. People don't know that a complaint is even justified. The other thing is, I didn't catch all the numbers, but it struck me that the sidewalk sale may have been the most expensive of all the permits. Is that correct? You stated the cost on the other two permits, short-term and long-term. What were they?
Short-term is $56. Long-term is $167 as of today. That will go up a few dollars in January 1st. The sidewalk sales are not permitted at all in any way, shape, or form by code in the city of Oregon City. And so the only way someone could get around that is by requesting a special event permit, and that's $340. And so code requires City Commission to designate an area of the city to make it allowed. And then I've added in the renewable right-of-way permit as a way to permit that, which currently would be $167. But again, that's a dollar amount that we've heard might want to come down, and that's probably a discussion along with the parklet and other discussions in February or March.
Yeah, I personally feel that usually a sidewalk sale or a special event permit, they're fairly limited in duration. I mean, the event is either a weekend or a matter of days or possibly a week at most.
Correct.
Cost seems somewhat prohibitive to me as to what we're trying to accomplish. So I'm all for revisiting that. The other thing I think this commission always needs, and in the entirety, you know, we've taken a lot of actions that were in response to COVID. and they seem to blend together. I don't want to have these things exist in perpetuity because we got confused in what we were trying to do. If we're trying to help businesses survive the COVID situation, I think we're going to give more latitude than, oh my gosh, now we've inherited this situation forever. And I don't want to get in that position. So we need to be cognizant of what we're looking at and what our goal is. I don't mean that for that to sound vague, but there's one response that is COVID based, and that those allowable practices to me should disappear when COVID is conquered. Whereas our ongoing business practices are another matter altogether and may be longer term in nature. That's all I have to say at the moment.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Donnell. That would cause us to maybe need to revisit the resolution that we passed that allowed the parklets. I would assume, I believe there was a time expiration on those, and therefore, if I'm understanding this whole conversation correctly about code versus resolution, we passed a resolution, it should have an expiration on it. That would be implementing the parklet piece. Is that correct?
And that is correct. The current resolution did expire November 30th, but the commission extended it to March 14th. And so I believe Ms. Turway is going to be coming in February to discuss a potential new resolution or extension of the existing resolution for the year 2021. So that's a discussion that is currently on the schedule for February.
Okay, and then to follow up on what Commissioner O'Donnell and the whole sidewalk sale about the designated area versus special event permit, if it's true that the only area in which this code applies is a designated area of downtown between downtown and 7th Street and Main and stuff like that, do we even need to go through the process of having a designated area if this code only applies to such a small area?
Well, the code as it exists today states that no sidewalk sales are allowed in the entire city. And so we would have to go, we would either need to change that part of the code and take that out, or bring a resolution to you that has the city commission authorize sidewalk sales on specific roads, which we'd be more than happy to do if that would be the pleasure of the commission.
Okay. Commissioner Smith, you had your hand raised next.
So the first topic that I want to comment on is that the time frame, March through November for temporary obstructions. So I know that there are some businesses that do take their tables and chairs in the winter season, but a lot of them don't. They're out there year round. I don't know of anyone that brings in their potted plants from the street because some of them are quite large. So I don't understand. I guess I don't see how that could be a requirement to have those removed in the winter months and then put back. I don't think they would. I guess I don't think they would stay there because there wouldn't be places for those businesses to store those things. I know that most of the outdoor furniture has been on the street year round. I know most of the potted plants are. So I guess I'm concerned about that time frame. The other piece, and I'm going to try to keep this short, but for the last decade on the commission, I've wanted to talk about special event permits and park permits and how those are related to the special event permits and how we charge for, street closures and how we charge for whatever. I never have heard sidewalk sales being equated to that. And I think it's ridiculous, honestly, but there's a whole separate problem with the whole fee structure for special events and even our structures for parks. So I don't know if that's ever going to come to us when we went through that work session about the parks. I don't know if that is coming to us in that detail eventually, but the and I'm quite aware of the processes in the past because I've planned a lot of special events in this city, and it seems like every year something changes that I'm like, how did that happen? And so the last time I remember filling out a special event permit, I actually was filling out a special event permit for a food truck because food trucks weren't allowed. But if you got a special event permit, you were allowed to have a food truck, and it was by nowhere close to $300 or even $100 at the time. I don't know what it was. But yeah, I mean, if a business is having a sidewalk sale outside of their store for a weekend, they're not going to make $200, let alone pay a fee for $300. So I think that is a separate thing than, a special event permit, or at least in my mind it is. And maybe someday we can tackle the whole special event permit process and the park use process, because I have concerns about all those. And every time it comes back, we make comments and then it goes away for another year. We don't hear anything about it again. So I hope we get to it sometime. Maybe in the goals process, I'll bring this up, because I think there needs to be a plan that these things are some of these things cross over multiple departments too, which complicates things. But maybe that's a different topic for a different time.
Okay. Commissioner McGriff, is that a new hand raised?
Yes, I did. Thank you, Commissioner Miles Smith. I wanted to piggyback on Commissioner O'Donnell's question and make a strong suggestion. I think that it would be good policy for the staff in the engineering department to get out at least once a month and walk the street and see what's going on. I don't think that we should be having to wait for somebody to make a complaint. I'm very nervous about somebody, one of the ADA advocates, coming into our town and suing our butts off because we're not in compliance. And that could happen. I already know a jurisdiction that's happened to. And it's just a matter of time before our number comes up. In addition, I would like to strongly recommend that we train the 2 people that walk the streets who are in code enforcement doing parking. They're walking there every day. And it would be a nice thing if they would see something, if they can get trained about what they need to know, and say to Joe Schmo, by the way, did you know you need to move your tables and chairs back, because a pedestrian, regardless of whether they're able-bodied or in a wheelchair, can't get through here. I just find it difficult that we wouldn't allow our staff to go out once a month, at least in engineering, take a stroll, see your downtown. And the 2 code compliance people, they're there every day. They should really be doing that. They should be looking at that stuff in addition to parking. They're down there. They know what's going on. I know I've talked to Jesse a couple of times when I was downtown, and he was on it.
Thank you for your comments. I think John Lewis might want to respond to that for you.
Good evening, commissioners. I just, first of all, we do walk these streets pretty regularly, especially since we've been pursuing the parklet piece. But even before that, I think you see a different sidewalk during the regular business hours more often than not. When we see the problems, it's on the weekends. And I often see those on the weekends because I participate in a lot of the downtown things. And when I see problems there, I don't necessarily use my weekend to go talk to the owner at the time. But when I might bring that back to the staff that issued the permit on the following Monday. So there is that. It's typically been, I haven't checked in with code enforcement on this, but in the past, you're right, they have. Jesse's the one that I remember. They were, and Trina was another one. They've had some turnover there, but I believe that they still continue to oversee, the encroachments. And Trina was going in and talking to the particular business owners about it. So I don't have a clear picture of where we're at with that today, but I can tell you we do spend a lot of time looking at these different facilities. This past weekend, we saw some parklets out there and some changes to some of the parklets that we weren't sure were permitted or have been even brought to our attention. So those kind of things happen. Sometimes it's helpful to have staff that are living in town, driving through town, to be able to see that on a weekend and then come back on that. So it's not a free for all right now, but I do think that on the weekends, is when Friday night, starting on a Friday night, on a nice Friday night, that's when you start seeing these folks using these outdoor tables and outdoor eating areas. And that's when you start seeing the pedestrian ways encroached upon with tables and chairs that kind of end up in that pedway. And to me, that's just the nature of the fact that we've got such narrow sidewalks there. We're asking a lot of a pretty narrow sidewalk, and thus the parklets, right? And so it's a struggle. But I don't think it's a free for all. We're managing that as we can. We're not bringing in staff during non-business hours to oversee that. So those times are going to be, either something I see or another employee sees who happens to be frequenting downtown. So
thank you, John. I appreciate that. Our other employee is a young man by the name of Zach. I don't know if he knows all that Jesse knows.
Yeah.
But anyway, thank you for that. No, I wasn't suggesting you go wandering around with your tape measure on the weekend and talk to people. Thank you for the comment.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
I personally feel that any action that has to be initiated on a complaint-based action by a civilian is inherently wrong. I mean, if you take a police officer who witnesses a misdemeanor, he doesn't go find a civilian and say, do you want to make a complaint on that? He takes action, and especially an action that situation could result in bodily harm. I just think that it needs to be enforced and by the same people. I agree with Commissioner McGriff. They're already there. How much harder is it to take a look and go, that just doesn't work? Other than that, if our sidewalks are so narrow that we can't effectively do this, then maybe we need to rethink doing it at all. And I'm sorry to say that, but I mean, that's not a defense that the sidewalks are narrow. Therefore, we can expect to have these difficulties. If people are willing to comply, I think the city is willing to work with them and trying to help businesses survive. But there comes a responsibility with that latitude. And that's all I'll say. Thanks.
Okay, so in the interest of time and to try to summarize where we're at on this, on these code revisions, I'm looking at the red line version so that I can kind of go through them all. I agree with Commissioner Smith on the timeline for it says sidewalk seating and planters that act as temporary obstructions shall be limited to March 15th to November 30th of each calendar year. I'm not sure why we need to have that in there. I'm not sure what the reasoning is behind that being in there when clearly folks can do wintertime seating around their restaurants. They're putting that. So unless there's a reason that.
No, the only reason that was in there was because there was a comment made at a previous work session where there was desire to visit that topic. And so it was staff's understanding that we wanted to codify a timeline. But there's nothing from a public works standard that requires that at all. And so if it's the pleasure of the commission to take out that item 1, we're more than happy to do so. Which is what I'm hearing you would like.
Well, I'm supportive of that. I'm not sure where the other commissioners are at. I see Commissioner Smith nodding his head.
I'm not. Only because it gives us the opportunity to check the status. That goes unchecked can get increasingly out of control. All it'll take is a look at the end of that time period. Things are working well, extend it or do away with it at that time.
Frank, it's not referencing an extension. It's referencing they're not allowed during the winter months, which is a problem. I mean, if it was to extend it, that's one thing. I get that. But I guess my problem is so far we've let businesses keep their furniture out there year round, and now we're going to say, well, now you got to put them somewhere in the winter months, which we've never done before.
Okay, well, I'm fine with leaving it the way it is, and as long as that their furniture doesn't block the right of way and allows sufficient passage to all.
And we will check with them on an annual basis because that's why we recommend this being similar to a business license that requires an annual permit. That way, a check can be made once a year from that standpoint.
Okay. And then the other primary item that we've talked about that I'm not sure that we have consensus on is sidewalk sales. I kind of feel like we're making this a little more difficult, and maybe this topic by itself needs a little more discussion. I'm not supportive of a special event permit being required, and maybe it's that in this case I would benefit from seeing which public sidewalks we're talking about. Because I can't figure out. I don't know that I know where all they apply, and it kind of sounds like it's confined to us a very specific area. So it'd be good to know what areas we're talking about as to whether or not we even need to designate a certain area within there or not, or how we want to work this. But I'm not supportive of the way the sidewalk sale piece is presented as is. Others, Commissioner O'Donnell?
I agree.
I'm not supportive of it either. I mean, if that fee is $340, even if you were making 30% profit, you'd have to sell over $1,000 worth of goods in a short period of time to just recoup your fee. I mean, to recoup your fee plus some reasonable profit. So I think I'm actually with Commissioner Rocky Smith on this. This whole fee schedule thing on special events, I'd like to revisit it and nail it down, because that's prohibitive. If I was a business owner and I had to pay $340 to do a weekend event or something, I don't think I would even do it. Thanks.
Well, what's the difference between having stuff on the sidewalk for sale, like an antique store, and having a sidewalk sale?
It's the same thing.
It's the same thing.
Well, that's what I mean. So if they're getting a permit to have something in the public right of way and it happens to be merchandise, it should just cover all of that instead of having a special thing for sidewalk sales.
Yeah, so the difference would be the code is very specific about sidewalk sales. There are a few antique stores who actually place their wares in an area that looks like the public sidewalk, but it's a private area.
Yeah, that store is closed. They had a little indentation, so they put it there. The one that was there that moved, they don't. They have their stuff up against the building, and that is on the public right away.
Yep. And so sales is intended to be something like a table with items on it, or a rack with things hanging from it. Items that are placed up against the wall, we've decided that's not a sale, that's a display, and a display falls under the obstruction. But when it's a sale and it's on a table or a rack, that's how we've determined the difference between sale and obstruction.
Wow. That's cutting it pretty fine.
Yeah, very fine line.
We have to figure out how to implement code somehow. Yeah.
I think we need to do away with that.
Does the commission want stuff in the sidewalk? Do they want sidewalk sales? Do they want merchandise out in the sidewalk? I guess is the question.
Well, I guess the issue with me is we already have it. So if we're implementing something now that we've allowed, and now we're saying, oh, by the way, you've been selling stuff out on your sidewalk for all eternity, and no one said anything, and now we're charging you $350. I mean, that's
let's get past the fee. We can set the fee at whatever the commission believes is reasonable. The question is, do you want to allow sales in the sidewalk? We're having this discussion about the difficulty of dealing with tables. Now, we will deal with the fee. Do we want sales in the sidewalk? Do we want people to be able to put their wares out in the public right of way or not? Really, that's the question. If we can answer that, we can write this however we need to.
So I would say I mean, if we're allowing businesses to have seating, then we need to allow businesses to have sales. It's an equality thing for businesses. If a restaurant's able to put, seating out on the sidewalk, then me as a business owner should be able to also sell on that same sidewalk. Little different during the COVID situation, but I think it should be accessible to all businesses if it is to any.
Well, I think he said the question is, it's a fine line between a display.
We're talking sales.
And
talking sales.
To me, that's having it displayed is asking you to come up and look at it to see if you want to buy it.
If the display is a display, that's one thing. If the display is for sale, it's sales.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying. It's out there to entice me to buy it.
Yes.
If the display has a little sticker on it, it's crossed the line to sales.
Right.
I think in general, it sounds like we're all pretty supportive of having sales in the sidewalk in the public right away. And so in that sense, that's a complete change to the policy or the code that's in there, where it's currently saying it's not allowed. And here's a couple of pathways if you want to request to have a sale on the sidewalk.
Yeah, because I think that's the big difference, right? The city has decided, and whether we implemented it correctly or not throughout the years, I understand has not been consistent. But this is a shift. This was not something that was ever intended to be allowed. So if we want to allow that, then Josh, we've got the ability to go back and write this in a way that doesn't try to provide these workarounds. If we want to allow it, let's just allow it, and we'll write it the way we need to.
And,
Yeah,
I agree.
We'd like to do.
and it would be my recommendation to keep code as is and bring the resolution. That way we can designate it in the large sidewalk areas. Because otherwise, if we just eliminate it altogether, then we've allowed it on the 5-foot sidewalk areas, and that's what we don't want to do. So the way code is written is not bad. It's the implementation part that's been difficult, and the resolution will fix that.
Yeah, I think it has to be against the building. It can't be on the opposite side, on the street side of the sidewalk if they're selling something.
So we'll turn this
Yeah.
up and let them bring something back to us to
Sure.
handle the sidewalk piece. Is there any other item in this code that needs to be resolved or that you need direction on?
No, those are really the two major things to understand the timing, how long it's allowed, and then the sales piece. So I think we got direction on both. Thank you very much.
Okay. And then we talked also about parklets, and we determined that parklets were technically already allowed in our code, and we use resolutions in order to implement it, say whether or not they're allowed or not, and that item's going to come back to us in March.
Yep.
Is that correct?
But yeah, it'll be back in front of you in February in preparation
February.
for that March deadline. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Commissioner Lyle Smith, I was going to ask if Chief Band heard my comment about his staff looking out for these things and whether that could be accomplished without going through a lot of faldy-raw.
You mean code enforcement? Folks.
Yes, and they're under the police department. So while Zach and Jesse are out there,
Yeah, as far as I know, they have. I don't know what degree. I just need to check in with them and see.
okay.
Yeah, but yeah, that's pretty easy.
Yeah, thank you. I would appreciate that. That way, it just gets taken care of. Right now, if I see something, I let the downtown manager know, and then she speaks to people.
Okay.
Yeah. I
Because it was
think
on the
that
weekend.
that's easy.
All right. Thank you. Do we have anything under communications? Commissioner McGriff?
Yeah, I just wanted to put this out there and we could discuss it further. So an article in the recent Westland Tidings, Oregon City News, Clackamas Review had Lake Oswego City Council seeks input for 2021 goals. And I'm wondering have we ever done that? This article, basically, it's very short. It just says that the council's seeking community input for preparation in its goal setting session retreat January 23rd. And they're saying that they have a little form people can fill out and you can send it into lakeoswego.or. blah, blah. So have we ever done anything like that?
trying to think.
Hi,
Not that
Katie.
I recall. I know we've gotten citizen comments and board commission comments, but I don't know that we've ever advertised it like that.
Can we?
Greg saying no.
Should we?
Thank you for the question. I think that is a brilliant idea. I hadn't thought of that. And if that's the pleasure of the commission, I'm sure we can. I do know that we did the community survey, and the results of that, you'll receive that prior to going into our retreat. And so I think that hopefully will provide us with a lot of citizen input going into the retreat. Excuse me. If the commission is wanting to hear more from the constituents, that's great. Typically, the goals retreat is the goals of the commission. But again, you're elected by those constituents, so how you receive that input is truly up to you.
I know we'll probably have to shift through them, but I don't know how you feel, folks, but I think that would go a long way towards stuff that we've talked about over the last 6 months about how we want to make better connections with our community. It's just input. We're not saying we're going to do it. It's just, you know, I know we'll probably get the regular folks that usually always go online, but maybe Kristen can construct something that would be simple to say, if you have an idea like, gee, we need the police cars to be purple instead of black and white. I mean, I don't know, whatever it would be. Somebody might have a suggestion. Sorry, Jim. The first thing.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
This is real quick. It's in the way of communications. I want the public to know that each commissioner has held an urban renewal meeting. Some of them actually bore some pretty important fruit. There'll be a larger meeting that'll convene. I would please invite people. I know it's not a dazzling subject. It's not something you probably want to do in your evenings, but some good ideas have come forward, and hopefully you'll get a chance to view them. And maybe I need to write some, or we need to write some things about the ideas that have been generated and get some feedback from the general public, just in a newsletter even. So thanks.
Okay.
It's very
I didn't realize he was going to move on to another topic. Does anybody else have any input on Commissioner McGriff's suggestion? I certainly don't have a problem with it. I would love to, think it's good to get citizen input. I don't know exactly what all the questions are that were in the customer service or community service questionnaire survey. So there's nothing wrong with providing another forum to receive input as long as we can.
Yeah, well, I mean, not everybody got called on the survey. So
Right.
that's a small number of people. Maybe there's other people.
I think it's a good idea.
Rocky, you think it's a good idea?
Yeah.
I see him nodding.
Okay.
Sounds
Sounds like
good.
it's a good idea. Thank you.
Sure, I'll go with the flow.
Is there anything else on communications? No. Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break, and let's see, it's almost 10 after. Let's try to come back and be all ready to go at 7:15. That gives Ms. Riggs time to kind of make all of the changes and check audio and video and all that. So, right, this work session is adjourned. Thanks.